This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Oliver Conway, and we're recording this at 13 hours GMT on Thursday, the 25th of June. Our main stories: people in Russia are voting on constitutional reforms that could see President Putin stay in power until 2036. Congo declares an end to its Ebola outbreak. And the Eiffel Tower reopens more than 3 months after France went into lockdown. Also in the podcast.
It's like an army that's advancing. They've completely covered the ground and every plant around me.
After the worst swarms in 70 years, Kenya is threatened by a second plague of locusts. And the boss problem. We find out why your manager may not be good at their job. He's already been in charge of Russia for 2 decades, and if a nationwide vote on constitutional reform goes his way, Vladimir Putin could stay on as leader of the world's largest country until 2036. The 7-day ballot has begun today, despite another 7,000 coronavirus cases being reported across Russia. Sarah Rainsford is our Moscow correspondent. So what exactly are Russians voting on?
That's the key thing, because as you just mentioned, the central point and perhaps the whole reason for this vote appears to be the change which will allow President Putin to run again for president if he chooses in 2024 and even beyond that. And yet, if you look at all the state TV coverage, if you look even at the official website on the amendments to the constitution that are being voted on, and you look at the literature that's been handed out on the streets, nobody mentions that particular reform. What they all talk about is everything else that's in this entire package. There are some 200 reforms that are being voted on everything from social welfare to family values to enshrining a patriotic education in the constitution, some other matters about the presidential role, a bit more power for the president in terms of appointing judges to the Constitutional Court, for example, and yet nobody mentions the fact that President Putin will be allowed to run for another 2 terms. And I don't think that's accidental. I think, this is supposed to be a package of reforms that everyone can see something in to support. And when it comes down to it on the ballot paper, it's just a yes-no vote. Do you support this entire package or not?
Now, it's being spread out over a week, but how safe will the vote be given the incidence of coronavirus in Russia?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, the number of cases in Russia is still rising, although the total number has been slightly lower in recent days. But we're still looking at around about 7,000 cases a day across the country. Here in Moscow, which was the epicenter, the number of cases being detected has been falling. But certainly I spoke to a doctor yesterday who told me that he was worried that after this vote, the number of cases would surge again. The authorities are saying that they're taking every possible measure to make it as safe as possible. So it's being spread over a week, not just one day of voting. People are being allowed to vote from home, so people are bringing the ballot papers to their houses, to their flats, and also there's online voting in 2 or 3 cities. The problem with that is that election monitors who normally observe these things say that just leaves a huge amount of potential, of course, for vote rigging. It's very hard to control the process. And today we've seen on social media even photographs from some polling stations. One appeared to be a car boot, and another one posted by the opposition politician Alexei Navalny was a bus which had been turned into a polling station. So it's not exactly your normal vote.
Sarah Rainsford in Moscow. The authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo have declared an end to the Ebola epidemic in the east of the country. Nearly 2,300 people have died since the outbreak began nearly 2 years ago. Here's our Africa editor, Mary Harper.
The Congolese Health Minister, Etienne Longondo, described the epidemic as the longest, most complex and deadliest in the country's history. The World Health Organization said defeating it seemed like mission impossible. It's the second worst on record, following the West African one in which more than 11,000 people died. Aid groups say there's now a desperate need for humanitarian aid, as the disease made it difficult to reach communities. The number of people requiring assistance has leapt from just over 1 million to 4.3 million. Eastern Congo is also affected by endemic violence, with dozens of armed groups operating in the area. There were more than 400 attacks on health facilities during the Ebola outbreak, further hampering efforts to control the disease.
Mary Harper. Since the beginning of the year, swarms of locusts have been laying waste to crops across East Africa, with countries like Kenya experiencing the worst devastation in 70 years. Now they're bracing themselves for a second wave of the insects. The UN says increasing numbers of immature locust swarms continue to form in northwest Kenya. From there, Anne Soy has this report.
I've come to a farm in the south of Turkana. I'm following the locusts trail. It's like an army that's advancing. Just listen to them. And it's impossible to step on anything other than the locusts. They're hopping away as I approach, sensing danger, I believe. But they've completely covered the ground and every plant around me. They're jumping from maize stalks now as I get closer. It's already eating the maize.
Everything green.
I've never seen anything like this.
It's green grams and also there is maize intercropped.
Francis Ekiru is not only a farmer, he's also an agricultural officer here. His neighbors are looking to him for answers, but this is a challenge he's never had to deal with.
I was expecting a good yield, but now I'm recording a total loss.
What does this mean for you and your family?
There's nothing. This is what we call poverty. This is a disaster.
Aerial spraying is the only sure way to control the numerous swarms of desert locusts, but they are not reaching every affected area in time. Locusts are hard to spot from high up in the air. 40-year-old Albert Lemasulani volunteered to help the pilots.
You should be able to see me now. I'm pretty much there. Are they in the trees?
Yeah, you can see where I am now. From where I am, yeah, continue turning. Now you can level off. This is where the concentration is.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming your direction. This is one of the times you feel good, when you see you've tracked the swarm, you see planes perfectly spraying the swarm.
It's a race against time to save crops and pasture across northern Kenya. Back at Ekiru's farm in Turkana, frantic calls to his seniors asking for pesticides.
So try to mobilize what you have in hand now, as you wait for Monday, yes.
So is help on the way?
Yes.
There's already a sense that things are getting out of hand. And if the locusts are not contained at this point, it could become a perennial problem in the country as long as the weather conditions remain favourable. And they're likely to be in northern Kenya, where it's warmer, there is plenty of sandy soil, and whenever there's humidity, they will easily reproduce.
Our senior Africa correspondent Anne Soy reporting. It's one of the world's most recognisable landmarks, but the Eiffel Tower has been shut for more than 3 months because of the coronavirus outbreak. Today, its longest shutdown since the Second World War came to an end, and these visitors were delighted.
I'm just waiting day by day, waiting that everything opens so I can be here, and I love the Eiffel Tower. It's my dream forever to be here, so it's great. And being not a lot of people is also great. This is one of my dreams come true. And today weather is wonderful. With the mask, a little bit sweating, but it's okay because not so many people. Everything refreshed now. Hand cleaning all the time. This is super. Not afraid.
But as I heard from our Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield, it's not quite business as usual.
You have to walk up, basically. There's no lifts. Those people who have turned up, and there aren't that many, are only able to get up to the second level. There are 3 levels on foot. So it is a marathon, and it is an extremely hot day here today. So that explains partly why there are not that many people there at the moment. The other reason being, of course, that there aren't many tourists in France at all. The only ones that are here are people who live in other European countries who've been able to cross over because of the relaxing of rules there.
Do people have to wear masks as they hike up those stairs?
Yes, they do. And they, like in every tourist spot now, and they're gradually all opening here in Paris, there are rules and signpostings, and masks are very much part of that. So, yeah, I mean, in addition to having to hike up 700 stairs, you have to wear a mask. But there's plenty of sort of landing spaces where you can sit and stop and pause and enjoy the view. So it's not as if you have to do it all at once.
You mentioned everything else slowly opening up. I mean, what can a tourist, if one was there, go and see?
Versailles is open, that I do know. A lot of the smaller museums have opened. The Louvre is going to open in, I think, about a week from now. I mean, it's all gradually beginning to sort of shift just before the start of the summer season. But, I mean, there's a big caveat in all of this. Many museums you have to book in advance to get a slot, so don't just turn up.
Hugh Schofield in Paris. Still to come in the podcast.
Here we have a test, the result of which makes really no difference as to how individuals are managed. And it's being rolled out on a very, very large scale.
Why COVID-19 antibody tests may not be a game changer after all. For months, the coronavirus pandemic has kept almost all passenger planes out of the sky, pushing airlines to the brink. Qantas in Australia has announced it will slash jobs amid dark predictions about the future of air travel. On Wednesday, the airport ground services company Swissport announced it would sack more than half its UK workforce. In Germany, Lufthansa is relying on a $10 billion cash injection to keep it afloat, two-thirds of it coming from the German government, and it's now been given the OK by the European Commission. The firm's boss, Carsten Spohr, told shareholders the funding was essential.
The stabilisation package is not a gift. We'll have to work hard to pay back every last cent. The interest from this package, together with the repayment of the loans and the repayment of the deposits, will be an enormous burden for us. Even in good times, we couldn't handle this. In corona times and the predicted aftermath in years to come, compel us to take ever more resolute action.
However, low-cost rival Ryanair immediately announced it would challenge the bailout in court. Theo Leggett is our business correspondent.
Airlines around the world are planning for a bleak future. Already badly hit by lockdowns in major markets, they do not expect the industry to recover fully for several years. Lufthansa's bailout is now likely to go ahead, after the group's biggest shareholder said he would vote for it, despite concerns about the German government's influence. The company will have to give up slots at Frankfurt and Munich airports, under conditions set by the European Commission. Meanwhile, Australian carrier Qantas says it will ground 100 aircraft for at least a year, and possibly longer. It plans to cut 6,000 jobs, roughly a fifth of its total workforce.
Theo Leggett. Coronavirus is clearly having a massive effect on many firms. But is this a good time to revisit some of the fundamental blocks of business management? Professor Kelly Shue at Yale University has looked into the so-called boss problem and whether incompetence is hardwired into the system of corporate hierarchy. She spoke to the BBC's Ed Butler about her study of a sales team.
We took a look at the HR data on sales workers for over 130 firms. So these are business-to-business sales workers, and we found pretty striking evidence that strong sales performers were very much more likely to be promoted into a management job role. As a sales manager, though, they're no longer directly involved in sales. They were actually worse managers.
It's odd, isn't it? It seems to me almost infallible, this theory, and you're saying you've seen it in practice. It would be true that you're going to push somebody up, if they do things good, you're going to promote them, and then you're going to carry on doing it until suddenly they hit the ceiling of their abilities, at which point they're suddenly in a job they're not very good at.
Yes, it's an unfortunate problem, and I think firms are struggling with this because they feel pressure to promote based upon current performance for at least two reasons. The first is this type of promotion policy does really work at incentivizing workers to work harder and exert more effort. And the second reason is we found evidence of pretty strong discouragement effects. So if firms were to deviate from this policy, and let's say they promote a lower performing sales worker because they believe that person actually has more management potential, what we find is that higher ranked sales workers appear to be discouraged. They lower their performance and are much more likely to leave the firm afterwards. So there's a retention problem that occurs if firms deviate from this policy of promoting based upon current performance.
Is there a cultural problem here? I mean, is this a culturally Western-specific problem, do you think?
I think it is a universal and very old problem. The oldest example I can think of, actually, is the Chinese imperial examination system. China historically, for thousands of years, selected officials based upon an exam, and it was merit-based. But the problem was the exam was based upon knowledge and ability to write classical poetry, among other things. And then these people, whoever scored the highest, would be placed into the role of tax administrator or tax collector. So again, it was an assessment of a true skill, but not necessarily matched to what was desirable in the job that these people were supposed to fill.
Kelly Shue at Yale University. The founder of the fitness company CrossFit is selling up following intense criticism of comments he made about the death of George Floyd. The newsroom's Kate Gregan has the details.
Greg Glassman, the founder of one of the world's most popular fitness programs, has decided to sell the company just 2 weeks after stepping down as chief executive. The move follows widespread criticism of Mr. Glassman after he made remarks about George Floyd, the African-American man who was killed by a white police officer last month. In leaked comments, Mr. Glassman is reported to have asked why he should mourn George Floyd's death, other than it being what he called the white thing to do. He also tweeted, "It's Floyd-19, an apparent reference to the coronavirus. There was an intense backlash as hundreds of affiliated gyms, athletes and sportswear brands cut ties with the business, which is estimated to be worth roughly $4 billion. Mr. Glassman acknowledged that he had created a rift in the CrossFit community and had hurt many of its members. The company, which has more than 15,000 affiliate gyms around the world, has been sold for an undisclosed sum to a tech executive, Eric Rosa. The incoming owner has said he'll be working hard to rebuild bridges.
Kate Gregan. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has called them a game changer, but antibody tests have been criticised by a group of scientists. They fear that the tests, to establish whether someone has had coronavirus in the past, do not prove immunity and are being rushed out at an unprecedented pace and scale. Richard Hamilton reports.
The test involves taking a small sample of a patient's blood and scanning it for antibodies, which the immune system produces in response to a virus. It detects signs of past infection as opposed to swab tests that tell if someone is currently infected. Last month, the British Health Secretary Matt Hancock said they were an important milestone in developing immunity passports, and the government bought 10 million test kits for health workers and some patients. But now, in a letter to the British Medical Journal, 14 senior academics say the tests are a waste of time and money, as a positive result does not indicate immunity. One of the signatories is William Irving, a professor of virology at the University of Nottingham.
We try and restrict what we test in patients to those things, the result of which will enable the clinicians to manage the patient properly. And yet here we have a test, the result of which makes really no difference as to how individuals are managed. And it's being rolled out on a very, very large scale.
But Sir John Bell, who's chair of medicine at Oxford University and advises the government, says the criticism is unfair.
They probably have underestimated the value of these tests. We do need to know how many people out there have been infected, and the only way to do that is antibody testing. We also, in particular settings, for example, in hospitals, we need to know which bits of the hospital has there been a lot of disease, where have the people most been affected, so we can manage our workforce much more effectively. So although they're correct in saying that you can't really advise an individual that they are protected from the disease because we don't have that data at the moment, they are useful tests at the level of surveys and the ability to change system behavior to control the epidemic.
Antibody tests have been rolled out in many parts of the world, including the United States, Canada, Germany, Italy, Australia, China and Japan. The National Health Service in England has responded saying its evaluation of the tests was of a high standard and that antibody testing would play an increasingly important role as we move into the next phase of our response to this pandemic.
Richard Hamilton. Weddings, like many gatherings, have fallen foul of lockdowns around the world. But here in England, at least, the rules have now been relaxed to allow them to take place, albeit with some restrictions. So are couples celebrating? Beth Timmins has been finding out.
A familiar summer sound will return as weddings are once again allowed as part of an easing of coronavirus lockdowns around the world. In England, the government announced ceremonies with 30 people will be able to take place indoors, but no large indoor receptions will be permitted, meaning tough decisions about guests and how the social distancing rules will be followed. But for some, the easing does not go far enough, with hymn singing and receptions still not allowed. Beck Hayes will not be going forward with her September wedding.
There is just no receptions allowed unless it's a normal outside gathering of up to 6 people from 2 households, and that cuts out a good half of the day that we were looking forward to.
Emma Jackson, however, has decided to go ahead, but will split her reception plans.
We postponed the big party until next year, so we're going to sort of end up having 2 different occasions. So the ceremony is just going to be this year, it's going to be just family.
But for Beck, the rules still seem unfair.
You're allowed to go into big superstores with hundreds of strangers, but we can't have a wedding of our closest people.
In India, where the wedding industry is estimated to be worth more than $50 billion, couples have also been forced to scale back celebrations. One of the country's 10 million annual marriages was planned by Nitin Arora and Chatalai Puri, who had booked a resort for a 3-day celebration in May with 450 guests. But the lockdown changed their plans, and the ceremony was instead attended by 16 people, including the priest. Like them, Emma says she couldn't afford to postpone her plans. Her fiancé is deploying to the Middle East on July the 14th, and her father is very unwell.
For him, it was a real milestone to get to the wedding, to give his daughter away. We were just panicking that, it would end up being another 6 months before we could get married. So Denise was so happy for us that we can go ahead.
And the restrictions have forced other couples to get creative in their choice of venue. Janine Miodunsky and Philip Schultz tied the knot at a drive-through cinema in the German city of Dusseldorf, while their guests watched on from their cars. For many couples, smaller ceremonies with fewer guests will be the new look for the big day. Less expensive, but still possible for those who don't want to delay the opportunity to tie the knot.
Beth Timmins. So weddings may be back, but some things will never return to the way they were before COVID-19. This week, the BBC is coming together for a season called Rethink, exploring how things could change after the pandemic. Today we hear from the British tennis star and former world number 1 Andy Murray, who made the headlines for being the first top male player to employ a female coach, the French woman Amélie Mauresmo.
In a post-coronavirus world, I would like to see more gender equality in sport, because I just think it's fair. I don't think there's loads more to it than that. I think in some ways it's sort of seen as being like radical in a way, but I feel like it's the complete opposite. I just think that it's a very fair thing that everybody gets treated the same, regardless of their skin colour, their sex, whatever. It's just very, very basic to me and seems extremely fair. And, I've obviously kind of experienced when I worked with Amélie and sort of experienced kind of sexism in sport. And then since then was when it really first sort of came to my attention. I then sort of notice it a lot more because I'm looking out for it. And it's not always that it's extremely overt, but it is there, and something that I would like to see continue to change, because, and it's one of the things that always annoys me with this, is it always seems like you're sort of complaining about it, that it's, suggesting it's really bad. But I've also spoken about how I just think it's something that tennis should really celebrate, because although we're not perfect, I think as a sport we do really, really well. And rather than it seen as being like an argument all the time, that we celebrate it a lot more. And I think it's great for our sport that the prize money at the major events is the same, and that men and women are getting treated equally at the biggest events. And I see that as being a good thing. And when my kids grow up and stuff, I hope that, the world's more like that. The thing that I just never understand with this stuff, and I've seen it a bit more like, with the Black Lives Matter movement, is that when people think that it just needs time for it to change. But why does it need time? Like a lot of this stuff, you can change immediately if the people in the decision-making positions, if they want to, they can change it straight away. Whereas I don't know, a lot of people seem reluctant to make change very fast. They want it to be a very gradual process. But yeah, I think, hope the next sort of 15, 20 years, things will continue to get better, continue to progress, and that more and more women will get, more opportunities in sport. I think that would be a good thing. That would be a positive thing. I don't see how that can be seen negatively.
Andy Murray. And you can get all our Rethink essays from bbc.com/rethink. And that is all from us for now, but there'll be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. I'm Oliver Conway. Until next time, goodbye.
Have you been missing trips to the cinema?
You know, people like to tell me about their home theater system. They tell me, oh, I got a 55-inch screen and it's awesome. And I always tell them, listen, I measure my screens in feet. Call me when you measure your screens in feet.
Hello, I'm Manuela Zaragoza. I present the Business Daily podcast from the BBC World Service. You heard there Penn Ketchum. He owns a cinema chain in the US. He's had to close his business amid the COVID pandemic, but that hasn't stopped him making money.
So you're stuck at home watching movies on your television in your living room. Maybe we could offer you some popcorn. So we are selling these massive bags. We've had people get their kids out of the car to take a picture in front of the theater because the bags are as big as their kids.
If you want to hear more, search for the Business Daily edition called The Future of Movies After Coronavirus. You'll find it wherever you download your podcasts. Business Daily. We're not just business, you know.